Yo, 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 what going on, big fam? It's your dog, the Ultra Melanite, coming to you live and direct once again from Charleston, South Carolina, aka the Holy City, you dig? And today we're going to do something a little bit different. We are going to discuss 5 facts that we feel prove that the so-called black man is indigenous to the Americas. We feel that the facts we are presenting today are virtually undebatable, especially when presented in the correct order. Grammar, logic, and rhetoric. That's the easiest way to teach someone. We intend to prove in this video today that the black man existed in every era of human life on the planet, right here in Americas. Listen at me closely. We intend to prove that the so-called black man existed in the Americas through every era of human life on this planet. We were not brought here on slave ships. So y'all sit back, enjoy the ride. If you like the video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep creating future content for y'all. And remember, we define words. Don't let words define us. You dig? Indigenous Black American grammar. Peace out. Fact 5. Evidence of human life in prehistoric America. When following the course of the constellations, those immovably and perpetually fastened upon America are reached. It will appear that while all that is sublime in the historic past centers upon Egypt, all that is sublime in the prehistoric past centers upon America. Firstborn among the continents, says Agassiz, America has been falsely denominated as the New World. Hers was the first dry land lifted out of the waters. Hers was the first shore washed by the ocean that enveloped all of the earth beside. And while Europe was represented only by islands rising here and there above the sea, America had already stretched in an unbroken line of land from Nova Scotia to the far west. That ancient America, as we shall see, was inhabited by the grand race of men, whose deathless traces have been left upon the surface of the globe and among the stars of the sky. You dig? Your educators would have you believe that America was uninhabited by humans until the arrival of the Mongoloid migrants through the Bering Strait landmass. This is a lie that must be told in order for Darwinism to be successful. Just think. If there was evidence of men in prehistoric America, that would mean that the African primate did not birth the human, debunking Darwinism. Well, truth be told, America had many great black civilizations in prehistory. How do we know they were black? Because these civilizations predate not only the arrival of the Mongoloid 10 to 15,000 years ago, but also the scientific birth of the Mongoloid onto the planet Earth. A great example for us is the Taupo site in Allendale, South Carolina, which shows evidence of human life of up to 100,000 years ago. There are also many more pre-Clovis sites, such as the Page Lasson site in Florida, or the Cactus Hill site in Virginia, or the Pedra Fuera site in Brazil. All of these sites prove our fact that human life existed in Americas prior to the Mongoloid arrival 10 to 15,000 years ago. Our further facts will prove who this human was. Let's just keep listening.
In the heart of the Brazilian wilderness lies a prehistoric rock shelter, decorated with thousands of strange paintings. South American archaeologists are finding unusual human remains. The skulls aren't European, but they aren't American Indian either. They belong to none of the prehistoric races known to have set foot in the New World. These skulls are as old as the Ice Age. So who were these first people to discover the Americas? And what became of them? Did they all disappear? Or did some of them survive?
Fact 4. There were Negroids in ancient America. While Fact 5 defines the fact that humans existed in prehistoric America, Fact 4 will define the race of the prehistoric human in America through Lucia. Lucia is a 15,000-year-old skeleton of a prehistoric American who was of a Negroid race. This is important because it proves that the Negro was here prior to the supposed Mongoloid expansion into the Americas. Being an anatomically modern human, it would be fool to think that her and her people did not leave descendants. It's not like she was the first nor the last of her people. It would not be feasible to think that the descendant of the Mongoloid would survive this era, but the descendant of the Negroid would not. We are the descendant of that ancient American Negroid.
Realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing these people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing these people as anything except Mongoloid.
So who was Luthia? And where did she come from? To find out, the skull was taken to a hospital in Rio de Janeiro to begin the process of reconstructing her face. The first stage was to make a three-dimensional CAT scan of Luthia's skull in order to build a replica. The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That to me is a Negroid face that has all the features you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
Another great example of ancient Negroids in the Americas is based on a fiction book written in the 1500s. Since it's based on a fiction book, this example did not quite make our list. However, we do think it deserves some attention when thinking logically. The only example of black Californians in classical history is based on this book, in which the author described the inhabitants of the islands of California as black Amazon women wearing gold bracelets and such. Even though the story itself is fiction, let's explore the facts that the story is based off. First, the Spanish had already been back and forth to the west coast of the Americas and encountered the race of the people there, so they had a good idea of who inhabited the Americas. At this time, California was mapped as an island because early on they thought the Gulf separated California from the mainland. So what is fiction for us was fact for them. California was an island to them, and this is how they viewed the inhabitants, as black and beautiful. Even the gold bracelets are key, because California definitely has gold, which was untapped by colonists until the 1800s. By archaeological and historical evidence, author Paul Barton puts a date on the black Californian at about 16,000 BC and said that they were similar to the oceanic Negroes. That will put the Negroid on both coasts of the Americas at about the same time period. And even if the migration theories were true, that would mean that Luzia's people would have entered the Americas from the west coast. That's the part of prehistory that they never discuss. But for the record, we don't subscribe to the migration myths. For us, people always populated the mainlands, and that the islands are just offshoots or broken off extensions of the mainland. For example, the Arawak people that populate the islands also populate the mainland here. Nevertheless, the black California makes for a great topic. The word California itself means black land, from the root word Cali in Sanskrit, and the word Fornia, which is a combination of the word flora and fauna, which simply means land. So California means black land. Let's go to the next fact. Fact 3. Evidence of the Negro in classical America. So while the last two facts prove the presence of the Negroid in prehistoric America, let's jump through the timeline a little and look at us in historic America. There are many historic civilizations in America that left us a picture of who they were. Today we are focused on two prominent historic Negroid cultures, the Olmec and the Mayan. Let's start off with the Olmec. Olmec means rubber people, and they built an empire in Middle America. They also left behind an image of who they were. Let's take a look. Out of all the jade masks and wood carvings, the large heads really stick out. They clearly depict a Negroid type, just look for yourself. Now I know scholars debate this issue, saying that these heads represent Mongoloids, even with the thick lips and braided hair. So let's connect the dots. The Olmecs were so great that they definitely had an effect on the surrounding culture. So let's move to the Maya. The Maya were a great civilization in the surrounding area. So how did they depict themselves? Take a look at these pictures. These are the Mayan mirrors, and they clearly depict two Negroid groups, braided hair and dark skin. They also depict some type of imperialistic ideal or some type of noble or religious ideal. Nevertheless, these people undoubtedly depicted themselves as a dominant Negro culture in the area. You cannot deny this evidence. Most classical scholars simply talk around or just overlook the fact that the greatest civilizations in America were evidently Negro. Fact 2. Early explorers described black people upon their arrival to the Americas. American. Original copper-colored races that inhabited the Americas prior to colonism. The key word is copper-colored. What people around the world would you consider to be copper-colored? Copper in its raw form can range from pink to dark reddish brown. So obviously, this description is based on the global views of copper, which is represented by a deep brown. The only people in America that fit this description is so-called black people. It does not apply to Mongoloids. Let's connect the dots again. If indigenous Americans were Mongoloid, then shouldn't they be described as their ancestors in Asia? Well, the Asians never described themselves as copper-colored. The Europeans had plenty encounters with Asians. If the American was an Asian, the European would have described them as such. Instead, they described the indigenous Americans in the same manner as they describe Africans and Oceanics. Another early description of the American, the Erewhon here in Charleston, are described as being a deep chestnut color. Have you ever seen a chestnut? Well, here's one. There's only one people in America that fit this description, the so-called black people. Here's our references. Lastly, we'll do the famous term, the red man. Indigenous Americans were labeled as red men. Well, red does not describe any Siberian Mongoloid at any point in history. Red can only be attributed to the so-called black people. The pygmies of Africa are described by themselves as being red, made from the red clay. The Himba people wear red earth to coat their skin. Take a look. Red is represented by a race is actually a deep brown, like a chestnut or copper, not the bright red you might be envisioning. All these descriptions of the American are virtually the same color or within the same color range. In fact, in some indigenous cultures, the word red and brown are the exact same word. These cultures do not have a separate word for red or brown. Nevertheless, Mongoloids throughout the world are not labeled as red, copper, chestnut, or none of these descriptions. These descriptions only describe Negroids. In my community, the term red still applies to some people, as we call them red bone.
Oh, what, brother? If you were to walk into any mosque in America and you just laid your hands on the first person or the third person or the fifth person that you see, you realize that you're laying your hands on a Native American?
I believe
there were only 8% of the slaves that came to America. So how is it that there are so many more people that they claim are black or African American? I think they got the numbers wrong, because a lot of Native Americans are the ones that they're counting as black folks too.
well, we're really one.
Yeah.
Fact 1. Most black Americans are not descended from African slaves. One of the biggest lies ever told is that black Americans are descended from African slaves. Up until this point, we have proven that the so-called blacks are indigenous to America and have existed here in every era of human life on this continent. Now let's quickly expose the slave trade. Most slaves were POWs. Most POWs were men, since women weren't allowed to fight, generally speaking. So that means that most slaves were men. Most of these men did not reproduce, as prisoners of war do not procreate in custody. But let's say that some of them did. Since most of these slaves taken from Africa were male, if they did procreate, it would have had to been with the indigenous American women. This fact cannot be ignored. In most instances, people who are in captivity have their death rate exceeds their birth rate, which makes them see a decline in their populations. Sustaining a slave population would be nearly impossible without a means of reproduction. There is no viable proof of breeding camps, only the quartering system where European men engaged with indigenous women, continuing the colonial process of racial whitening, as history has proven. Furthermore, our modern black American culture has very little influence from Africa. Things that are staple of the black community, such as soul food, originates in America, not Africa. Fish and grits, collard greens and neck bone, cornbread, etc. are all American food, not African slave food. Our hairstyles are depicted in ancient American art. Braids and dreadlocks are shown on statues and paintings from our ancestors. Sports like basketball that originated in America are dominated by black Americans. Some American stereotypes even associate basketball with black people here in America. And our names are indigenous to America. Names are the easiest way to define a specific culture. While names like John or Betty is English, names like Tanisha or Shamika are defined as being American and represent black people, so-called black people, for the most part. Certain sounds and tones are prevalent in our culture. Watch our video on names for more info on this subject. Hopefully the evidence that we presented to you in this video today is enough to make you understand that the so-called black man is indigenous to America. We have existed here in every era of human life on this planet. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you leave a like and hit the subscribe button. Make sure to also share this with your peers. Let's see what they have to say about the subject. It's time for us to wake up and learn who we really are. Identity is the key. Grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Peace out. Ultramelanite 2019, baby.